Hello everyone, Dave Franklin here. Recently, I was a guest speaker at the Global Azure Boot Camp held at Troy University in Alabama. I did a couple of presentations there, one on Azure Virtual Networks and another on Azure Virtual Machines. And what I'd like to do is just present you with the same content that I provided to the people there so that you have the opportunity to learn what they learned. So let's go ahead with this presentation. The first one here is Azure Virtual Networks. So we had certain sponsors that helped us out, and this is just a shout out to them. But in this case, on the 22nd of April 2017, a Saturday, worldwide, Microsoft had global Azure boot camps provided by different organizations. Some were MVPs presenting, some were colleges and universities, user groups, things like that around the entire world. And I was fortunate enough to participate with the Global Azure Boot Camp at Troy University in Troy, Alabama. A just absolutely gorgeous campus filled with, this time of year, late April, it's just beautiful. The weather was perfect, sunny, in the low 80s. Everything as green as can be. The brick buildings were just beautiful, some of them quite old. A really nice campus. We were in Bibb Graves Hall, a very famous building on campus, one of the older ones, that houses the school or the College of Business, which includes the computer science department. I'm not 100% sure if it's computer science or computer in the business world, because it is part of the business community. But if anyone knows otherwise, please correct me, because I might not be 100%. In any case, I presented this slide to the group too to tell them about various user groups that we had in the local area. Montgomery, Alabama is the nearest big city. It's not really a big city, but it's the nearest big city to Troy. Troy is about halfway between Montgomery, Alabama and Dothan, Alabama, or Mobile, Alabama if you're going southeast. So this was the agenda that we had and what we were going to cover. In step number 5, once we finish doing that, it takes anywhere from half an hour to 3/4 of an hour to actually create the virtual network gateway. So what I'm doing here is recording what I previously presented. So what I can do there, as soon as I click the create or the OK button at this point, I can just pause the recording, wait for it to finish, and then you'll see the end result of it. You won't have to sit there and watch that wheel spinning for 3/4 of an hour like we did in the live presentation. So let's talk about what Azure Virtual Networks, or VNets, are all about. So Microsoft Azure itself is a multi-tenant public cloud computing platform. It is designed for building, deploying, and managing applications and services through a global network of Microsoft-managed data centers. It provides SaaS, also known as Software as a Service, PaaS, which is Platform as a Service, and IaaS, or IaaS, which is Infrastructure as a Service. And it supports many different programming languages, tools, and frameworks, both including Microsoft and third-party software and systems and vendors. So we're going to focus here in this demonstration on virtual networking concepts in Azure. So we're going to look at the Azure Virtual Networking, setting up those VNets, setting up subnets. We'll look at network security groups, load balancers, and finally, virtual network gateways and how they operate. So here are some key concepts about Azure Virtual Network. First, the VNets are isolated one from another. You can create separate VNets for development, testing, production that use the same CIDR, which stands for the Classless Internet Domain Routing, or CIDR, address blocks. Conversely, you can create multiple VNets that use different CIDR address blocks and connect networks together. You can segment a VNet into multiple subnets. Azure provides internal name resolution for VMs and cloud services role instances connected to a VNet through its own DNS. or domain naming system. You can optionally configure a VNet to use your own DNS servers instead of using Azure internal name resolution. And this is important if you're connecting using a virtual network gateway between your on-premise data center and the computers there, and the computers or virtual machines and services that you have in the Azure cloud. All Azure virtual machines and cloud service role instances connect to a VNet and have access to the internet by default. You can also enable inbound access to specific resources as needed. We can create inbound and outbound firewall rules that allow only certain ports to be accessed, or to block specific ports that we don't want to be accessed. By default, when you allow a particular port number, protocol, IP address, whatever through, it will then block everything else. So it works under the principle of deny all and allow specific. Azure resources, such as the cloud service and virtual machines, can be connected, as we said before, to the same VNet. The resources can connect to each other using private IP addresses, even if they're on different subnets. Azure provides default routing between subnets, VNets, and on-premise networks, so you don't have to configure and manage routes. VNets can be connected to each other, enabling resources connectivity to any VNet to communicate with any other resource on the VNet. VNets can be connected to on-premise networks through private network connections between your network and Azure, or through a site-to-site VPN, virtual private network connection over the internet, which means it will be encrypted. It will be encrypted with IPsec using, I believe, IKE version 2. VM and cloud services role instances. Network traffic can be filtered inbound and outbound by source IP address and port, destination IP address and port, and protocol, as I said before. And you can optionally override Azure's default routing by configuring your own routes, or by using Border Gateway Protocol, BGP routes, through a network gateway. So, we're now going to go over to our Azure portal, and we're going to do all these things as shown in this slide. I know it's a kind of a busy slide, so just save it momentarily. Oh, by the way, I should mention this. On my website, I actually have these steps spelled out in a document, so let me show you that. So as you saw before, the name of my website is mctdave.com, although my business name is Dave MCT. I own both domains, by the way, but I have a separate. The Dave MCT domain is more or less an internal thing, and my outside is MCT Dave. But anyways, if you go to the tab up here that's labeled Troy, GABC for Troy Global Azure Bootcamp, you'll see I have the script to create all the network, the various networking components that we have on these slides. So if you click on this, it will just open it up. It's a Word document. It explains every step and what needs to be done. Also, there's a link here to a very, very nice public Microsoft PDF document about virtual networking with Azure. And it's filled to the depth with all kinds of information. There's 754 pages, I believe, in it. So there's illustrations, there's a glossary, there's all kinds of information. I strongly suggest you download it if you're interested in this concept. Okay, so what we need to do is now go over to our Microsoft Azure portal, and you can just type in portal.azure.com in a browser to get there, and then you'll go ahead and you'll sign in, and I've signed in, as we see here already. So you won't see this until you sign in with a name and a password. Now, for those people who attended yesterday's Global Azure Bootcamp, they all got an Azure Pass subscription, which is good for a month, and $100 of Azure credit. For others, you can get a trial subscription for this. That's basically the same thing. But they will ask you for your credit card number, and they won't charge you unless you go over your limit after, which is, again, the $100 or 1 month, whatever comes first. If you're going to go that route, then you really need to manage it correctly and make sure you don't overspend, but we'll talk more about that later. But anyways, this is my Azure Pass subscription, and we can see right now I have no resources. So our objective here is to go ahead and make a resource, and the first resource we're going to make is a resource group. So I'm just going to type up here new, and then I'm going to say, you can put this right in the marketplace, in the search, resource group. And when you spell out enough of it, it will come out. We're going to select, in this blade that shows up of the filter of what we're looking for, we're going to select this resource group object, and then create. And I'm going to name it Demo Resource Group, or RG. Demo RG, it is the Azure Pass. Now, my Azure Pass, I've previously I've previously assigned my region as South Central US. And I think there are 34 separate regions around the world. And, you know, it is the internet. So when we're connected to the internet, we might have a direct connection that goes even through another country. I mean, it's not as if, and the South Central US, I believe, is in San Antonio or in Dallas, somewhere in that area. And that's fairly close to where I'm at in Alabama. But it might not be the closest, electronically, if you will, over the internet. For example, the Central US might be closer. I think that's in Chicago, or East US, or East US, or East US 2. I believe one of them might be down towards the Virginia, North Carolina area. I'm not 100% sure where they're actually at, because on the internet, you know, everything is either local or completely remote. You just don't know how many hops it will take, what routers are busy or not busy, what backbones are available, things like that to get to a particular location. So while I've chosen South Central US because from my mind that's geographically closest to where I'm at, it's not necessarily the closest electronically, but it will work. So we're going to keep that, and now I'm just going to say create, and that's going to make my resource group, and now the resource group exists. And the reason why I did that first is when I make a virtual network, I have to assign it to a resource group, so I have to have one. And now I'm going to click New again. And in this case, I know what I want. It's networking, and I want a virtual network. So notice this blade comes up, the marketplace blade, then the networking blade, and it's right on the top. These are featured apps. If you click See All, you will get a list of all the networking apps available through Azure. But in our case, we're just making a virtual network. And we're going to use the Resource Manager deployment type, which is not classic. I'm going to click Create on that. And now we're able to type in some of the parameters of our virtual network. So the name of this virtual network, I'm going to call it Demo VNet 1. And the address space is assigned is out of the public IP address range of 10 for the Class A addresses, but it's using a /24 CIDR notation, which is really 255, 255, 255. So that only leaves the last octet available for addresses. And I want to change that. I'm going to change it to 16, which will now, when I hit tab, you'll notice it will go up to 65,000 addresses. So that gives me a few more. The subnet name, and I do want to make a subnet in this case, or do I? No, we're not going to change it. We're going to have one called default, and it's using the 10.00/24. So it uses one whole additional octet right here, this one right here, to identify the network. It's Azure Pass is a subscription. Use existing resource group, which is going to be the demo resource group I just made, and now I'm going to click Create. And given all these parameters, it will create for me the demo VNet. Notice it says deployment started and then succeeded. And now I have it. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make a couple of subnets within this address space. Okay. I just want to refresh this page and get my resources. So then by and by, you should see the resource. I had to refresh to get this, but there's a checkbox I'll show you in just a moment so you can see things that are created when they're created in the dashboard that I had put away for this. But I'm going to click now and make the subnets. I'm going to click the demo VNet 1 I just created. And then we're going to see we get this console tree, if you will, with a bunch of different things on it, from overview, activity log, access control. Notice how we have address space, and finally, right here, not finally, because it's not the last thing, but the thing we're looking for, which is subnet. So I'm going to click subnets. And right now, we have the default subnet that it created, and none other. So I'm going to make 2 additional subnets, one called production, and another called development. And I'm going to put these so that they just use the next consecutive network address. So we see with a /24 CIDR, the address for default subnet is 10.0.0. So the next one after that should be 10.0.1, then 10.0.2, etc., because we're just simply incrementing on the 3rd octet. So let's go ahead. This plus button makes a new. We're going to say new subnet, and we'll give it a name. And the name of this subnet is production. And there it is. Notice it's on the 10.0.1/24. As I said before, we're not going to assign yet a security group or route name. We're just going to say OK. And that creates it. And by and by it will show up underneath default, and there it is. And we'll make one more. And this we're going to call dev, short for development. And notice how it's using the 10.0.2. So it used the next consecutive network address. And say OK to that. And then it shows up again. And so this part of our demonstration is finished. So now we're going to make the network security group. And the idea of the network security group is to let you create access control lists to block or allow traffic on subnets or individual virtual machines. So we're going to do all these things. Again, refer to the script, but they're all listed here as well. So let's go ahead back to our portal. So we're back at the dashboard. And in this case, we're going to create something new once again. And in the search the marketplace, we're going to put in network security. And we're looking for a network security group. I didn't have to spell out GROP because you see it showed up right here. So I'm going to click that, and that brings up the blade that has within it the object known as network security group, which is just a simple Microsoft published object. So that's what we want. And now we're going to click create. And here's where we start assigning some information, such as the name. And the name in this case, we're going to call it, it's going to be part of the production network. So we'll call it prod for production network security group, or NSG in caps. It's camel case like typing with upper and lower case just to make it easier for the eye to spot exactly what it is. The resource group we'll make this for is going to be demo RG. And I said before, you know, when I had to refresh the dashboard to actually see the thing I made, there's a pin to dashboard checkbox you can put the thing in there for. Now I'm going to use that so you don't have to refresh, but do keep in mind if you make a lot of stuff in Azure, and it's quite possible to do so, you're going to have a full dashboard. And the idea of having a dashboard with everything in it kind of defeats its purpose. The idea of the dashboard is a quick look at your important stuff. If everything is in there, then it's going to be much harder to find what's important compared to what isn't important. But in any case, we're going to say create to that. And that will go ahead and make our network security group. So here it is creating. You can see the deployment started. We're seeing now pinned to the dashboard, so it's going to show up here. Once again, I said if you do that for everything, you're going to have a very busy dashboard after a period of time. In our case here, we're just making a few things, so it works. Okay, and now that we've done that, now we've moved to the blade for the prod NSG. And you see it here. And now we're going to make an inbound security rule. So we click in the console tree, inbound security rule. And we're going to add one, since we have none right now. And in this case, we're going to name it web server. And notice it has a priority of 100. You know, this is kind of a relative thing. It's always 100. So when you have a bunch of different inbound or outbound security rules for that matter, and they all have the weight of 100, or priority of 100, excuse me, then they're all going to be treated equally. Only when you have different rules that you want to apply in different ways to different groups might you increase the priority or decrease the priority, because I believe 99 is one less than 100 and therefore takes precedence. In other words, if you make something a higher or a lower priority, then that will be the one that's always chosen, unless it's not available. So in our case, very few people actually change this. It can be changed, but if you click the little I of it, beside it, it will tell you what this means. Our source is going to be any IP address, any address range, whatever. And the service in this case is not going to be custom. We're going to change this to HTTP. And notice when that happens, it puts port 80 in the port range, because 80 is the port for HTTP. And we're going to allow HTTP port 80 in. And so then now we're going to say OK. And that creates the rule for us. And now that we have this rule, we can add it to a particular subnet. So let's click in the console tree subnets. And we want to associate this rule with the particular subnet. So let's go ahead and say associate. And the virtual network is going to be, of course, the one we made earlier, the demo VNet 1. And the subnet is going to be production. And we'll say OK to that. And now we'll see that we've associated the subnet and the rule with it. So there's the rule. And there's the association. And that completes this portion of the slide that had all the create the network security group stuff in it. We'll now move on to the load balancer. And now that we have this rule, we can add it to a particular subnet. So let's click in the console tree subnets. And we want to associate this rule with the particular subnet. So let's go ahead and say associate. And the virtual network is going to be, of course, the one we made earlier, the demo VNet 1. And the subnet is going to be production. And we'll say OK to that. And now we'll see that we've associated the subnet and the rule with it. So there's the rule. And there's the association. And that completes this portion of the slide that had all the create the network security group stuff in it. We'll now move on to the load balancer. And before we move over to the load balancer, just to say we just made the network security group in this case, but there was another slide that goes with this. So if I click on that, you'll see it's the one to associate that rule, inbound security rule, with the production network. So now we're going to build a load balancer following all these steps right here. It's relatively quick and easy to do, so let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to return to our dashboard in the Azure portal. The Azure load balancer is a layer 4 load balancer that distributes incoming traffic across healthy virtual machine instances using a hash-based algorithm. By default, Azure load balancers use a quintuple, which includes a source IP address, source port, destination IP address, destination port, and protocol type, hash, to distribute traffic across available servers. Load balancers can either be internet-facing, that is accessible via public IP addresses, or internal, only accessible from another virtual network within Azure. Azure load balancers also support network address translation, or NAT, to route traffic between the public and private IP addresses. So what we're going to do here is say new. And in this case, we're looking for the load balancer. And it shows up after just a few letters typed. And we're going to go ahead and grab the first one here, which is the load balancer published by Microsoft, and create. And the name is going to be Demo LB for Load Balancer 1. And notice it's going to be, in our case, it's going to be internal. So it's not going to be a public one, it's going to be internal. Now we choose the virtual network, which is demo VNet 1, and the subnet in this case, which is going to be production. The IP address assignment will be based on dynamic. That is, like DHCP, the Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, clients will negotiate and get an IP address appropriate with the virtual network that they are created in. Notice it is a subscription Azure Pass. We're going to use an existing resource group, which in our case is the only one, demo RG. And we can also pin this to dashboard and click create. And as you can see, it is now deploying. And there are all the properties thereof. It is done. And that completes this scenario. And we'll move on to the last one we have here, which is to create the virtual network gateway. So now, the last thing we have to do is create a virtual network gateway. Then our networks will all be set up so we can start making virtual machines. So the important thing on this is, when we look at the virtual gateway, is we're going to apply, later on, a public IP address, or a PIP as it's called, to this gateway address. So this is going to this gateway, I should say, and this is going to give us a public address, one that we can reach across from our data center, from our computers at home, whatever, we can use the internet to get to it. So a VPN gateway is a type of virtual network gateway that sends encrypted traffic between your virtual network and your on-premises location across a public connection, that is the internet. You can also use a VPN gateway to send traffic between virtual networks across the Azure backbone. The type of VPN you can choose depends on your VPN device and the kind of VPN connection you intend to create. You can make point-to-site, inter-virtual network, and multiple site-to-site VPN connections, but these are only supported with the route-based virtual network gateway. So what we're talking about is these types, point-to-point or point-to-point to multiple locations. In addition, if you're creating a VPN-type gateway to coexist with an express route gateway, the VPN gateway must be route-based, and the express route gateway must be created first. So, now is the time when we go back to our portal and set this up. So here we are in the portal where we left off last. So what I'm going to do is now go back to my dashboard and click again the new button, or the plus symbol here in the original console tree. And then we can type in virtual network gateway. Actually, it shows up right there on the bottom, but here it is. So the virtual gateway, network gateway we're going to make is the one published by Microsoft. And then we'll click create on that. And now we're going to give it a name. And we're going to call it Demo VNet GW1. And what kind of gateway type it is? It's going to be a VPN, so it's going to do encryption. Not express route, but a VPN to do encryption. Is it going to be route-based or policy-based? In this case, we want to make sure it's route-based. In the SKU, SKU stands for, I believe, Standard Knowledge Unit or something like that. Stalking Knowledge Unit. Let me see if it even tells us. Doesn't, but it's an abbreviation you hear a lot. Now, standard is going to be the kind that's going to give us the most bang for the buck. High performance will cost more, and basic will cost less, but it will have less performance. So we'll just keep it at standard. In any case, we're not going to hang on to these since it's part of our Azure Pass subscription. And now we need to choose the virtual network that we're going to connect, and of course that's our demo VNet 1. And notice how it gets another subnet range, because both sides of this gateway, it will have a public on one side and into our network, our VNet, as another subnet on the other side. So it can route through that whole demo VNet 1 and all the subnets in it. Like 10.0.0.0 I think is our default, 10.0.0.1 is our production, and 10.0.0.2 is our dev gateways, or excuse me, subnets. And now to choose the public IP address, we don't have one. So here where we're going to create that PIP. And the name of this is simply going to be the same that we have here, demo vnet gateway 1-PIP. So we know it's associated. In fact, let me use the same way I created the name in the past. Demo vnet GW. I thought I had that up here. Demo. Let me make sure that's back in here. vnet GW1. Okay, good. And we're going to create this by saying OK. And now for the entire thing, notice it's in the Azure Pass. The resource group is demo RG. We'll pin this to the dashboard and say create. Now, this is going to take a while. So from this point forward, since I am recording this and recording the screen and my voice, I'm going to pause the recording, and then when it's all finished, I'll start it up again. So while it's deploying, eventually what you'll do is when I stop recording, you won't see anything else it says here. You won't see half hour of deploying, but it will pop up and be a whole item by that time. Okay, and here it just finished up. Now if we go and look at our gateway, then, all right. So now it comes up and it tells you it is a VPN gateway. And look, we have a public IP address, 13.84.190.111. So that concludes this demonstration slash presentation that I did on building virtual networks in Azure. So we finished this part. And again, these are the types of virtual private network gateways we can build. We actually built a VPN, single site-to-site tunnel. We have our network right here. We can use that IP address to connect to, or use the IP address at the distant end. In our case, it was 1384 or whatever, to get into our VNet, our demo VNet 1 in the cloud. So that wraps it up. We looked at creating virtual networks and additional subnets. We then looked at creating network security groups and then applying firewall rules to them. That's the inbound rule we made. We looked at making load balancers, and then we finished up by creating a virtual network gateway with a private IP address acting as a VPN. Thanks a lot.